We move on to another big story, the latest effort to seek progress in the long-stalled peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians is scheduled to resume today. Senior Israeli and Palestinian negotiators, along with United States mediators, are set to meet in Jerusalem. U.S. State Department officials are hopeful, but contention runs deep, even as Israel released 26 Palestinian prisoners, a condition of these talks. Deborah Luderbeck has more on the prisoners' boisterous homecoming.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas greets prisoners released by Israel in the West Bank. Israel freed 26 Palestinian prisoners Wednesday in an effort to keep U.S.-backed peacemaking on course for a second round of talks. The release comes as Israel plans for more Jewish homes on land the Palestinians claim for a future state. The peace efforts come after a 3-year standoff ended with the first round of talks in Washington last month. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Brazil remains optimistic.
And our hope is that we get to the real issues on which we ought to be focusing, which are the final status settlement, the final status issues. And I'm very hopeful we will get there very, very soon.
The 26 men released were the first batch of 104 Palestinians serving long jail terms, many for deadly attacks on Israelis. They've now won amnesty, in a move that may improve Abbas's domestic standing, despite his having dropped demands to condition peace talks on a halt to settlements.
To explain what's at stake at the resumed peace talks, our guests are Alan Weiner, co-director of the Stanford Center on International Conflict and Negotiation, and Rami Khouri, who is the director of the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. Hello to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking some time with us. Rami, I want to start with you. Israel's announcement that they're building 3,000, I believe the number is, new homes in the occupied territory. How does that affect these talks? Does it cripple them in any way?
No, not this time. This is a huge issue for the Palestinians. It's existential. This is the land that is occupied by Israel that the Palestinians want to have as part of their state, and Israel is gobbling it up. But it's clear from the agreement to restart these talks that both sides are going to stick to the negotiating table. They made a pledge to do this for 9 months, and there will be provocations on both sides to try to get the other side to quit. And my guess is that neither side is going to quit unilaterally, because they have made a major commitment to the United States. And in return, I think both sides want to find out what is the United States going to do to try to make this process succeed. So the settlements are a big problem. They're illegal. The whole world sees them as illegal, but they're not going to be a deal breaker right now.
Alan, there was quite a bit of negotiations just to get these talks started, and they've been negotiating about the negotiations. What do we really know about what's on the table to talk about during this first round of talks?
Well, the parties, of course, have been unusually quiet this time in talking about what's been going on in the conversations between Kerry and the Americans. But we, of course, know the issues that need to be addressed as part of this process. Of course, there are the final status issues. Borders are incredibly important. The status of settlements, the status of Jerusalem in general, and the holy sites in particular. What will happen with the right of return on Palestinian refugees, water issues, security assurances and guarantees for Israel. These are all of the issues that have been part of the negotiating process in the past, and none of those issues have been solved, so we can expect to see them on the table again this time.
Indeed, and that brings up a question. Is there any common ground here? Rami, you go ahead and answer.
Well, they've been talking on and off for about 17, 18 years. Different Israeli and Palestinian governments and negotiators, different American mediators and presidents and secretaries of state. So there are huge areas where the differences have been narrowed, where there's pretty clear agreement on where the final status accord will come down. But the two gut important issues are still unresolved, and that's the refugeehood of the Palestinians. How do you resolve the refugeehood of the Palestinians? And for the Israelis, it's Arab acknowledgement of the state of Israel. The Israelis want us to acknowledge Israel as a Jewish state. The Palestinians are saying, we will acknowledge Israel as a state. We will have normal, peaceful relations with it. The Arabs have the peace plan on the table. The Arab peace plan has been there for almost 20 years. But the question of, do you recognize it as a Jewish state or what kind of state? And those are the two really gut issues. All the other settlements, borders, even Jerusalem, it's pretty clear where the agreements are going to come, because these have been negotiated for years and years and years.
Sure. And Alan, you made reference to the U.S. involvement in these peace talks. The U.S. would best serve this effort by playing what role?
Well, the United States, particularly in the previous administration, seemed to see its job as trying to get the parties to the table. And in my view, that's insufficient. That's not enough. The parties will have tremendous domestic political obstacles to making the kinds of concessions that would be necessary for them to reach the agreement. I agree with Rami that we know what the only possible agreement looks like in most respects, and yet that's a very difficult agreement for the parties to accept in view of their domestic political constraints. We actually have two relatively weak regimes on both sides, which will face significant opposition. That's why the United States, I think, needs to take a much more assertive role in saying, it's not enough for you to come to the table, but we're essentially going to begin to lay out the terms of what we think the peace will look like. And then it involves a little bit less an issue of the Palestinians accepting an Israeli proposal or the Israelis accepting a Palestinian proposal. They'll both have to hold their nose and accept the American proposal on the understanding that the Americans are insisting that that be the terms of the deal. Now, that will require the Americans to take a much more robust position than we have in many, many years. And it will require the Americans to demonstrate some tough love towards the Israelis and to make clear that the Israelis are going to have to make some very difficult concessions that the United States has not been really willing to push them to accept in the past, particularly on borders in the end and Jerusalem.
And speaking of those concessions, let me stick with you for just a second. Hang tight, Rami. I wonder if either side has enough domestic political capital to sell with ultimately going to be a difficult concession to come to any agreement.
I'll start. I mean, I think we've seen surveys among Israelis that the Israeli public would support a peace agreement if Netanyahu is the one who makes it. The question is Netanyahu willing to sort of move away from some of the core constituencies, some of the hardliners from the right? Among the Palestinian community, you have the refugee and diaspora community, which is very influential. And of course, you have the split between the Fatah and Hamas. But I would defer to my colleague Rami, who knows much more about Palestinian politics than I do.
Jump in there, Rami.
Thank you. I would say I agree with that. And I would add the way that both sides are going to be able to make those concessions is if they get the bottom line minimum demands of their own people. So if the Israeli people get a Palestinian and Arab recognition of the state of Israel as a majority Jewish state, which it is now, it's about 80% Jewish, within secure borders with normal, open, peaceful relations and trade, tourism and business and everything, if the Israelis get that definitive, absolutely clear perpetual recognition of a normal life from the Arab neighbors, especially the Palestinians, the Israelis will then probably be able to give to the Palestinians what is their bottom line, other than the borders and those areas where issues that we think they can agree on, which is an acknowledgement of the nature of refugeehood for the Palestinians and to resolve refugeehood by giving the refugees several options, including for a limited number to be negotiated, Palestinians who can go back to their original homes in what is now Israel. That number has been talked about, 50,000, maybe 100,000. My guess is it has to be a little bit more than that, but it has to be negotiated and agreed. If each side gets its bottom minimum, then it'll give the other side what it wants. You need people like F.W. de Klerk to do this, like Mandela, people who will make those heroic transformational decisions, and their people will follow them because this is the future that both sides deserve and want to reach.
Indeed, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, so we'll be at this for a while. Rami Khouri as well as Alan Weiner. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.